Este es el nuevo grito de Nintendo. Es Donkey Kong Country para Super Nintendo. Gráficas únicas nunca antes vistas en sistema alguno.
¡Salvaje!
Donkey Kong Country.
Solo en Super Nintendo.
Un reto no apto para humanos. Con Donkey Kong Country y tu distribuidor autorizado, la diversión está garantizada.
You know, Donkey Kong Country here took a platforming formula and just shot it right in the face, you know. It just backed itself up with originality through things like its enhanced visuals, its insane music, and its very tight and compelling gameplay. Stuff that was only matched by the likes of Big Mario Bread Man here, you know. But they also had some of this hit you in the fucking face, hard hit and snort your nose, cocaine type gameplay, brother. This game spawned a whole series of Donkey Kong Country games, but I want to talk about the first one today. So let's go ahead and get started with the Donkey Kong Country Iceberg. It's gonna get hairy. It's gonna get bananas. It wasn't as common as it is nowadays back in the day to reuse bosses in video games, and if they did reuse bosses, they changed the battle enough for it to still usually feel fresh. Meanwhile, today, you know, you have full boss battles that are just QTEs, so those are really sick. One major complaint of Donkey Kong Country was the reusing of bosses, and even though other games in the series are still guilty of this, I feel it's the laziest in this game. There are two occasions in which bosses are reused, and it is for two of the easiest bosses in the game. Both the Naughty Beaver bosses are just straight up jokes, and the second Neki can pose a slight challenge, but overall, for these two characters to take up half of the bosses in the game, that's pretty lame. I remember thinking this as a kid too, especially walking in and seeing Naughty again. I was like, not this Joker. But honestly, it's made up by the original bosses in the game, like Queen Bee, and even the King K. Rool boss fight. I mean, that's just the best one in the game. Donkey Kong Country definitely wasn't the first one to attempt the fake out ending because, you know, Kirby existed much before Donkey Kong, at least Donkey Kong Country. But it definitely did it in a very hilarious, unique way. At a certain point in the final boss battle of the game, you'll land on K. Rool's head for the last time before he goes down for the count. You know, get referee Mario out and count this guy out, he's fucking seeing stars. The screen goes dark and a mock list of credits starts to scroll up the screen. But as long as you're looking at the screen, you should notice pretty quickly that something's up with the credits. If it's not the myriad of incorrect spellings to fit the theming of King K. Rool's name, it'll surely be the credit to the commander of the game, King K. Rool himself. And after another second, King K. Rool jumps back up on his feet for the last couple of hits to wrap up the fight, but this time he's much stronger and moves way faster. Get fucked, idiot. This fake ending would be later used in other boss fights in subsequent games, but it was never as jarring as it was in this game, as it was pretty unusual at the time for platformers to have fake endings. Especially after like 3 or 4 hits on a boss, you kind of think the thing's gonna go down soon. But King K. Rool, listen, he was a motherfucker, but you can always count on him being gimmick first to win his fights. If you have enough skill in your fucking tool belt, you can bring down this big bastard, no problem. In early beta images for the game, we can see that Donkey Kong was not always as strong as he was in the final game. In the first game, Donkey and Diddy differ a good bit. Maybe not at first sight though. Both have roll attacks and both can hop on enemies' heads to kill them. However, with certain enemies, we find that Donkey Kong will one-shot them, while it takes Diddy Kong 2 hits with enemies like armadillos. And with other enemies like the Crusher Kremling, Diddy can't harm them by jumping on them at all. However, it seems that in the beta, Donkey Kong was also unable to kill these enemies by jumping on them, making these enemies only killable by barrels or rolling attacks. This was likely too difficult for certain sections of the game. Honestly, one that comes to my mind is the moving platform level late in the game, where one of the enemies falls on your small moving platform. I mean, good luck with that. It's interesting to think that the game could have actually been more challenging than in the final product, which many would argue is already a very difficult experience. In the early days of Donkey Kong Country, Nintendo wanted Rareware to keep it simple with the cast of the game and use some familiar faces. The extent of the Donkey Kong character lineup at that point was Donkey Kong and, well, Donkey Kong Jr. So Nintendo wanted Rareware to include Donkey Kong Jr. as the second character in the game. However, when Rareware presented the rough draft of Donkey Kong Jr., Nintendo said the new design differed way too much from the original Donkey Kong Jr. design, and told them to either change the character overall, or change the design to better fit the original. And Rareware knew what was up and said, "Fuck you, Miyamoto, and your fakes boils," and went ahead with the creation of a new character known as Diddy Kong. And man, they hit this shit out of the park. Diddy Kong is almost as popular as Donkey Kong, appearing as the lead in one of the best games in the fucking series. I feel like that was a huge fuck you to Nintendo after the DK Jr. incident. They were like, yeah, you like your stupid Donkey Kong design so much, huh? Well, now you don't even play as him, idiot. Also, the second character's now a girl. 90s old Japanese guys be like,
it was perfect, but no, you just had to blow it up. You.
in a lot of the promotional material for the game, Donkey Kong can actually be seen wearing a light helmet in mine stages to help him light his way through the stage. This was later cut from the game's final release and replaced by the animal buddy known as Squawks. It's unknown if this helmet was going to appear in every mine stage in the game, meaning possibly in the beginning all of the mines were dark instead of just that one stage in the final game known as Torchlight Trouble. Donkey Kong being equipped with the headlamp seems like a cool power-up akin to something maybe you'd see in like a Mario game, but them having switched it to being an animal buddy seems to fit the theming of the game better for me anyway. They clearly felt that same way because the same mechanic was brought back for Donkey Kong Country 2, and this time as a fish with a light. Yeah, good luck searching the Titanic. Ah, that's fucked up. In the pre-production phase of Donkey Kong Country, the animal buddies were originally trapped in cages rather than the wooden boxes they're in the final game. This was thought to also include a key in which players needed to find in order to unlock the animal buddy, but perhaps due to interrupting the flow of a level or added difficulty, the key aspect of the animal buddies was cut. But it's kind of cool to think there was once an added layer of challenge in order to get the animal buddy upgrade. But honestly, that would make me skip over these fools way more than I already do. Bro, Winky would become so depressed because he'd be stuck in that cage forever, dog. I would never see that dude. I already skip over him so much. He's so shit. Fuck you, Winky. Speaking of these things, there were several animal buddies featured in the final Donkey Kong Country, but Rareware had many more planned that either didn't have time to be added or they ran out of room in the game. They were going to stick with the animal theming, and each animal would have a unique advantage that would have helped Donkey and Diddy on their adventure. There was a dolphin character who likely just got turned into On Guard or something, as it would have been featured also in water levels. There was an owl named Hooter who would give players information similar to how Cranky does in the final game. However, Hooter might have given information during levels themselves, which is something Cranky doesn't offer in the final game, so I guess we took a fat L there. There was planned to be a fox that would show players the secrets, and honestly, given how many secrets there are in the game, this would have actually been pretty nice to in the final game. So there was a snake buddy that was cut, and it would have worked a little bit different from the snake that's featured in Donkey Kong Country 2, as these would have acted as vines Donkey and Diddy could grab. There was even a giraffe buddy who would use its neck and extend it and help Donkey and Diddy reach greater heights. Yeah, I'll believe that when pigs fly. Speaking of which, there was a flying pig buddy that was cut and later repurposed into an enemy in Donkey Kong Land. So yeah, I guess this pig was a real fence sitter in the fucking Donkey Kong K. Rool battle, huh? Asshole. There's a bevy of enemies to fight off in Donkey Kong Country. They mostly range from different wildlife animals attacking you to well-known Kremlings. Throughout the development of the game, the developers ended up cutting a good few characters, some of which would make appearances in later games, and some that just faded into obscurity. We start off with our first enemy known as Cloak, and he was meant to be a magician Kremling that would have used magic attacks against the Kongs. If you're familiar with Donkey Kong Country 2, then Cloak will likely sound familiar as the Kremling was used in that game instead. He had a bit of a overhaul because, well, I don't know if I'd exactly call this guy a magician, more just horrifying. There was a cut statue Kremling known as Crumble, and honestly just the idea of a Kremling being able to disguise himself as part of the backdrop is a really intriguing idea to me. I mean, these were already hyper-realistic backgrounds we were running around on, so the idea of a Kremling being able to come out of the background and jump scaring you is a really cool idea to me. Then there is a robot Kremling who was known as Crocbot, which actually has some files in the game resembling a robotic Kremling, so that was probably him. This could have also been the inspiration for Chaos from Donkey Kong Country 3, but that's just my own speculation, who knows. A few more enemies that were going to appear in the game but didn't include Puffed Up, Shuri, and Gloop, who would all return later in the series of games. There was also a variation of the snake enemy called Spitz, in which he would actually spit poison at the Kongs instead of just slithering around like in the final game. This likely posed too great of a challenge or interrupted gameplay flow, so they cut it and replaced it with Slippa. Peppa Pig be slipping on these ice cubes I don't pick up. I'd just be kicking them under the fridge and Peppa Pig could slip it on the residual puddle. There are a ton of enemy variations in the final game, so honestly, these cut enemies aren't missed that much, but when it comes to enemies to bonk on the head, fuck it, I say more the merrier. Manky is an enemy featured in the final Donkey Kong Country. He's one of the more rare enemies to run into throughout the game, and his appearance is a little more noticeable than other enemies, given that he looks a lot like the main characters. Like, what's this Kong's deal? Did he have a drug deal go bad with Donkey Kong and now he owes him money or something? Well, in reality, it's much more simple. Manky Kong is just angry at the Kong group for not including him into the Kong family. And notice how most every other monkey in the Donkey Kong series is related in some part to Donkey Kong, whether it be the last name Kong or not, except for this guy. Manky's origins remain a mystery, and he definitely feels like the Joker of the Donkey Kong universe. Just don't let this guy go on any late night shows, if you catch my drift. His name refers to the unkempt nature of the Kong with messy hair and jacked up teeth. In a Nintendo Power excerpt, it describes Manky Kong having fallen off because he couldn't get enough of the barrel throwing, unlike Donkey Kong, who graduated to 2D platformers. This made me realize that Manky Kong is just the same game mechanic as the first Donkey Kong, and now I'm in a dream world, and buildings are starting to curve above my head. I gotta wake up. I'm in the Kong Matrix. Borky Kong? Is that you? What the fuck's going on? Donkey Kong Country fires on all cylinders, and one of those big ass cylinders is the music. Every track in this game will take you on its own adventure, and half the time you don't even have enough time in the level to hear a whole song, but we'll talk about that later. One of the hot tracks from this game doesn't even actually originate from Donkey Kong Country. While Donkey Kong Country is home to iconic video game tracks like Aquatic Ambience, Funky's Fugue was actually originally written for Killer Instinct. One of the composers confirmed this after a theory was started by Did You Know Gaming after comparing Funky's track with another Killer Instinct track. Apparently, after hearing the song in Killer Instinct, Nintendo thought it would be a great fit for the Donkey Kong Country's promotional material. Then Rare liked that so much that they put it in the final game. Some think the song doesn't actually fit with other tracks in the game, and while yeah, I can kind of see what they mean, it is still a very iconic track from a game that only provides bangers. Sure, the track is one of the only upbeat ones in the game, but it's also for one of the most upbeat characters in the game. Yeah, I just caught Funky doing a line off Cranky's cane, and not his fucking actual cane, if you know what I mean. While the original Donkey Kong Country's visuals aren't anything super impressive nowadays, the technology for when it was released was very impressive for the time. This was very strenuous on the developers as well, because the computer power wasn't caught up to support the processing time for creating these assets. Therefore, it was stated by developers that during the development of the first Donkey Kong Country, they had to use all of their air conditioning in the office to keep the computers from overheating, causing the rest of the office space to lose air conditioning, thus causing very hot, sweaty working conditions. Talk about blood, sweat, and tears. Jesus, no fucking way I would have shown up to work and sweated my dick off just to see a render of Donkey Kong dying. However, many of the developers said it was worth all the sweat and hard work for a superior product, and honestly, it really shows even all these years later. Before the technology known as mocap was made, game developers had to think to use methods like real-life inspiration. This can be seen a lot used for things like Disney movies, where they'll visit real-life things like waterfalls and shit to get an idea of how to accurately animate things. This is exactly what the developers at Rare did when developing the first Donkey Kong Country. In order to get Donkey Kong's mannerisms down pat, the developers saw it necessary to look at the real-life creature face to face. And I think this actually helped a lot and gave Donkey Kong way more character than he ever had in the past. Rare really rose Donkey Kong from the ashes. This guy's a fucking phoenix. Donkey Kong wouldn't be the way he is today if it wasn't for George the Ape that Rare developers went to see that day in the 90s. Let's be honest, let's all pour one out for George. Obviously, they would end up exaggerating a lot of the gorilla mannerisms, but the real-life creatures also have a lot of personality, so it makes sense as to why Donkey Kong has so much personality in these games. I do find it worth noting that the apes didn't move a lot when Rare went to see them, so they actually had to base Donkey Kong's running animations on a horse, and it really shows in the final game, because holy shit. Could you imagine seeing a real-life gorilla run like that? No, I can't. King K. Rool has been at the top of my video game villains list for quite a while. Sure, Bowser and Ridley are cool villains, but nobody was more badass than King K. Rool. With the addition of the character into the Smash Bros. Universe, the original designer of King K. Rool gave some insight into K. Rool's name. He stated he had wished he'd spent more than 5 minutes on coming up with the name, especially considering he was going to be in Smash now. The original name for King K. Rool was going to be Commander K. Rool, which would reference in the fake credit sequence at the end of the first Donkey Kong Country. However, it was switched back to King. But that still doesn't really explain what the K stands for. Well, the creator of K. Rool said it actually stood for nothing. It was simply a K because it was created as a pun for the word cruel. The creator stated it could stand for anything really, and honestly he said it could stand for Keith. So that's what I'm going with. Oh, true King Keith Rool, please address the nation. King Keith Rool really just sounds like that dude who tries to pander half-drink monster energies to people. Even though the K doesn't actually have a meaning behind it, it still serves a purpose as it gave the needed oomph behind the character's name to match the bombastic boss fights you'd encounter in these games. The original plot for Donkey Kong Country was a bit different than how it plays out in the final game. First of all, there was a small cutscene that played that showed a lanky blue Kremlin known as Corporal Krizzle, which is also what I heard the next Eminem album is going to be. This character Krizzle was meant to steal the precious artifact Donkey Kong was taking care of, known as the Golden Banana. After that, the Kongs were tasked from Cranky Kong, who at the time was known as Grandpa Kong, to get the artifact back. While Rareware didn't end up using this storyboard for this game, they would later reference it in Donkey Kong Land and even use the Golden Banana idea for Donkey Kong 64's main collectible. I think the impact of K. Rool's actions were definitely projected by adding a whole horde of bananas instead of just one banana relic. So yeah, I think it was a good idea to change it. Although because of this, I always kind of logically thought that Donkey Kong is fighting for this horde of bananas that at tops will last him 2 weeks. I don't know, it seems like a lot of bananas for 2 weeks. I don't think anyone's getting through all those bananas before they're brown, but maybe Donkey Kong is a sick fuck who only likes them when they're fully spoiled. Ugh, what an asshole. The earliest version of Donkey Kong Country can be tracked back to a project known as Donkey Kong vs. Super Wario. This was leaked by the lead game designer on the project in September of 2015 when he dumped a bunch of his original concepts on his socials for fans to enjoy, where the story would have told of Wario shooting Mario with a stone gun, or a futuristic gun that acts as Medusa or some shit. Plus, Wario would utilize time travel to take over Nintendo Land apparently. Yeah, not that Nintendo Land. A parrot would end up seeing these events and fly to Donkey Kong Kingdom and warn Donkey Kong, thus starting the game. This is a strangely similar intro to Donkey Kong 64, where you start the game as Donkey Kong receiving warning of King K. Rool's arrival by Squawk's parrot. Anyway, this was as far as the concept ever got, and there were only a few concept drawings and a notebook with everything from the project inside. The game would then be turned into the original draft of Donkey Kong Country when Diddy was still known as Donkey Kong Jr. The project was said to be scrapped because Nintendo wanted Greg and the team to use new enemies and not rely on enemies that were already established like Wario. This was perhaps used to differentiate the series from the Mario Land and Wario Land games. However, hearing the concept for this story, it seems a lot more ambitious than what they ended up going with, and to include Mario characters may have made the game perform better when it first came out. Although, by doing this, I don't think the Donkey Kong universe would be as unique as it is from the Mario universe, so in the end, I think we got the best outcome, but it's still really interesting to think about what this game would have looked like. As I've established many times on this channel in the past, Shigeru Miyamoto is not a man to be trusted. Sure, he has the key to a few of the biggest franchises in the world and really isn't stopping on his goal of world domination in the way of the Red M, but there is a cold being behind the cool exterior he presents. As proof, I want to tell you a tale of the development of Yoshis Island. During the development of the sequel to Super Mario World, Donkey Kong Country had just released. It was doing amazing in sales for a 2D platformer of that era. This would spawn many rave reviews that would then make it back to Nintendo, adding to their library of stellar games. Seems like a really good thing for Miyamoto, right? Well, in reality, due to Donkey Kong Country's great success, the higher-ups began pressuring Miyamoto, who was developing Nintendo's next 2D platformer at the time, to make it reflect Donkey Kong Country more. This was purely due to Nintendo execs seeing Donkey Kong Country as the next step in graphical technology and thus wanted all of their games to reflect that visual caliber. There's an unconfirmed comment Miyamoto made during an interview after the release of Donkey Kong Country that states, "Donkey Kong Country proves that players will put up with mediocre gameplay as long as the art is good." God, what a bitch. He would later deny making this comment and adding that he worked himself heavily on Donkey Kong Country, even though it was in the hands of Rareware. However, this does seem like something Miyamoto would have said in spite of Rareware at the time. But the more telling truth to the situation can be found in Yoshi's Island's art style. As we know, Yoshi's Island has a very unique art style, one that hasn't been really matched since, and this was apparently in direct response to Donkey Kong Country's success. Miyamoto being pissed at the pressure to make the game look more realistic, like the Big Monkey game, made Miyamoto swing the pendulum in the complete opposite direction, thus proving that he really actually likely made that original statement about Donkey Kong Country. Hey, at least we still got two very great video games with very unique art styles and directions, but to know that Yoshi's Island could have possibly looked like Donkey Kong Country is pretty interesting. I am glad the art style stayed exclusive to the Donkey Kong Country games, because it always sucks to be pressured to change the art of your own game, and now we can have games that are super stylized like Yoshi's Island. That's right, for once I am agreeing with Miyamoto and his shattered small man ego. Not for the reason of being petty, but for the reason of being able to back up your gameplay with a unique kiddie art style and still make a masterpiece. A big middle finger to Nintendo execs in the form of an art style akin to a baby's nursery. That goes pretty fucking hard. The world of pirated video games is crazy, especially back in the day. These are usually contained in the most bootleg jank cartridges you've ever seen in your fucking life. Like, I'd like to buy these Pokemon cards right here before I ever bought a game in a cartridge that looked like that, Jesus Christ.
That don't look like Sableye, that looks like Bulbasaur fucking Psyduck in the ass.
Nowadays, it is less likely for you to log onto eBay and buy a counterfeit game from China, as you're likely going to just go and torrent something or download some ROM or something. It's all files is my point, and you don't get any of that jank thief creativity you used to back in the day. That's what I like to refer to it as anyway, jank thief creativity. This is the last-ditch effort to promote your shitty port of an already real game, and they usually use images that are from a completely different game or character model to promote a game that doesn't even have 3D models in it. But there he is, there's 3D Donkey Kong from Melee promoting Donkey Kong Country. This was the case for the original Donkey Kong Country, which had many pirated versions, but the most prominent was the pirated copy that released on the Nintendo NES, or rather the Famicom, and was a fully ported remake of Donkey Kong Country running on NES. This seems like more of a cool novelty thing today, but back in the day, this was some people's legit way of experiencing this game, and I gotta say, it doesn't look like that bad a copy. There aren't many ROMs that exist of the game online, or any that I could find, but I've seen some gameplay of it, and it seems to be pretty true to the original game. There are things in the game that just can't exist with the original processing power of the original NES, therefore things like animal buddies are missing from this version. But hey, if you only had 20 bucks back in the day and not the 60 they were asking for when it came out, I say fuck those little animals, you don't need them. I would love to find a ROM copy of this game one day and play through it, as it seems to be a full game, but I haven't found a full ROM of the game yet. There are reports of the game being sold in a combination cartridge with a pirated copy of Jungle Book 2, and man, what a cartridge that would be to own. Like, yeah, I have Clay Fighter S graded, complete in box, but my true best game in my collection is definitely the Donkey Kong Country 4X Jungle Book 2 NES pirated combination cartridge. Not only is there a pirated version of Donkey Kong Country, there was also a competition cartridge, which was a much shorter version of the game. Not that I thought that was really possible. This version featured 11 levels and didn't feature the map screen, but instead just took players from level to level. The point of the competition was to get the highest score, so getting bananas was very important for players. That and beating the levels quickly, as players were only given 5 minutes to accrue a better score than everyone else. Considering there were 11 levels, it was likely that players wouldn't get to the end of the sequence, but if they did, the game would simply end or freeze when the time limit is up. The cartridge only ever saw 2,500 copies being made, therefore it's one of the most rare Super Nintendo games, up there with other competition cartridges of its kind. The game was used in the Nintendo Power Fest 94 and later in the Blockbuster World Video Game Championships 2 event. This would suck to have if you're looking for a way to play the full game, but having this would be so cool for the collector and me. Even to play this on original hardware would be really cool, seeing as it would likely have been used in one of those competitions. Many players who used to play this game as a child now describe a certain aspect of the game as disturbing, scary, and even depressing. That, of course, is the game over screen. All of the game over screens in the Donkey Kong Country series could all be described as this respectively, but we'll be talking about the first game's game over screen. It features a beaten and bruised Donkey and Diddy in front of an endless black void behind them. They both seem pretty disgruntled and damaged. Looks like you and a buddy after picking a fight with the fat retired UFC guy at the bar. You just had no idea. The pitch black background combined with the music that plays made many players shudder at the game over screen. However, for others, it just caused sadness, which I guess is the point of a game over screen, right? To deter you from seeing it. However, this one may have been a bit too much, as many people see this game over screen and, their demons start coming out of them. When I see this, all I want to do is punch a hole in my poster of SpongeBob shaking his ass and yell about how cold my Hot Pocket was for lunch. Throughout the game, there are some really magical tracks that can be heard. Donkey Kong Country unequivocally has one of the best soundtracks on the Super Nintendo. The whole series has some serious bangers, but focusing on the first Donkey Kong Country, you can actually find yourself missing the best parts of these songs. This is actually a personal entry I added to the list, as I never realized I hadn't heard many really cool parts of songs I had otherwise written off. My best example of this is the song for the mine levels. There's a really nice Zen-like riff in the middle of the song. But if you don't suck absolute ass at the level, you likely won't ever hear it. That's kind of the problem with most of the songs in this game. These are dynamic ass songs that have riffs like a song you'd hear on the radio. Sure, they don't have vocals, but there are breakdowns and variety in these songs themselves. However, half the time you can beat the level in 30 to 45 seconds and the song has had barely any time to start. This is kind of a shame, as some of the best parts of the soundtrack are located in the later half of songs. This is just something I noticed as I frequently listened to Donkey Kong Country soundtracks and scripting, and noticed that a lot of the songs were a lot better than I had remembered when playing the games. Well, that's about it for the original Donkey Kong Country. This game will always be a classic in my eyes. Even though I like the second Donkey Kong Country more, this one will always still be great for introducing the world to the series. This game has everything you could want from a platformer: excellent gameplay, great music, crisp visuals. It's really a complete package. Stay tuned to the channel when we take a deeper look at Donkey Kong Country 2.